10 things you didn't know about a medical interpreter. 1, we are not walking dictionaries. I have over a decade of experience in healthcare interpreting. I used to provide proficiency assessments for Spanish-speaking providers and hospital staff interpreters. I train medical interpreters, and I own a company that provides medical interpreting services to hospitals and clinics across the nation. And still, there is always something I don't understand or don't know how to say. The constant feeling of not knowing what a provider will say is one of the most enjoyable parts of interpreting, and it's what draws most interpreters to the profession. Now that being said, an interpreter is always prepared to interpret a term they don't know by utilizing a credible source in real time. But make no mistake, professional interpreters are constantly studying hundreds and hundreds of medical terms. Number 2, interpreters are focused not just on what is being said, but we're also focused on understanding of the message, right? So while we're interpreting for this patient, we're judging the register of their language, right? We're seeing if they're speaking at a low register, possibly less educated, or a high register, more educated. And then based on the way that our provider is speaking, be that a nurse or a doctor, we can tell if the registers are not matching. If the doctor or provider is speaking at a higher register and our patient is speaking at a lower register, well, it might lead us to look for more understanding. And so if a difficult term or procedure is being explained, and even though our patient's saying yes, yes, see, right? We are also looking to make sure that, okay, that may be misunderstood. Let's go ahead and ask for some follow-up and just, make it known to the provider that could we ask for teachback, right? Could we ask for follow-up questions? Number 3, we manage the flow of the session, not the provider. It's not a power struggle. The patient and provider are vulnerable, and they're trusting that the interpreter is accurately interpreting their message faithfully. So it makes sense that it would be, to some extent, it would go at the interpreter's pace. Some interpreters can take on more information than others, but the speed and length of the content will depend primarily on your interpreter. Interpreters are trained to control the flow without explicitly telling all parties that they are controlling the flow. Number 4, we can give an interpretation in different modes or different ways. The 2 most common forms of interpreting or modes of interpreting are consecutive and simultaneous. Consecutive interpreting is kind of what you would expect. It's turn-taking. One party says something, the interpreter interprets, the next party responds, the interpreter interprets. So it's a back and forth, it's more of a conversation, much of what you would expect. Another mode of interpreting is simultaneous. Simultaneous interpreting refers to interpreting in the same time that the speaker is speaking, with a slight delay. So while an interpreter is interpreting, they're doing this in chuchotage, as not to compete with volume of the speaker. So the interpreter will be near the patient, speaking in a whisper tone, and we will be interpreting everything that the provider or the party is saying in real time with a 2 to 3 second delay. This allows the speaker to speak at length and the interpreter missing key information. Number 5, we have multiple roles. Some of the more common roles that we have as interpreters are the conduit, clarifier, and cultural mediator. As a conduit, my primary role is to interpret the message being said by the speaker as faithfully as possible, right? Trying to match the emotion, the volume, the inflection, trying to basically take on that persona and be them, whether that is the provider or the patient. Second is the clarifier role. As a clarifier, I am always looking to make sure that the message is understood by all parties. If I feel like there is a misunderstanding, then I can interject as the interpreter to clarify, to make sure that there's a smooth transition of the message from the source language where it came from to the target language of where we're trying to get it to. And then lastly, the cultural mediator. An interpreter is not simply repeating a message, but they're also thinking, how is this culturally relevant? Could this cause a misunderstanding due to culture? Number 6, if we ask for clarification, a repetition, or to look up a word that we are unfamiliar with, this is the sign of a professional interpreter, not one of incompetence. The best way to think about this is, if we admit when we don't know a term or understand a concept, that should tell you that everything else that we interpreted is spot on. We aren't afraid to admit we don't know and don't understand, and that's what you want in an interpreter. That's what's going to lead you to believe that this message has been interpreted faithfully. Number 7, we interpret everything. Like I said, pauses, gestures, ums, size, tone, volume, inflection, as well as the information that a provider asks us not to interpret. At times, a provider may say, oh no, don't interpret that. But as an interpreter, my goal is to make it as if both speakers speak the same language and have the same culture. So if it's an utterance or something that is said in front of an English speaker, well then it should be said in front of a Spanish or Mandarin speaker. We accurately convey the content and spirit of the message by using the most effective mode of interpreting while taking into consideration the cultural context. Number 8, we interpret the meaning of the message, not word for word. With a world full of idioms, slang, and culturally specific ideas, an interpreter will focus on the meaning of a message and not specifically the words being used, from the source language where it came from to the target language where we're trying to get it to. A few examples, it's raining cats and dogs outside, or break a leg. Those don't interpret well. Number 9, we are focused as much on the culture as we are on the message to interpret. We focus on the culture of the patient, not just the patient, but the provider, the hospital system, and the U.S. healthcare system. For our providers, a patient may have a culture that they're very much unaware of, but the provider understands not only their culture, but also the hospital system where they work and the U.S. healthcare system. Now for our patients, that is all fairly foreign to them. The culture of the provider, the culture of this specific hospital system, as well as the U.S. healthcare system in general. For example, consent forms, advance directives, just talking about insurance, right? Premiums, copays, deductibles, out-of-pocket maximums. This is very foreign to a lot of our patients and thus require us to be culturally aware. Number 10, we are not a patient's emotional support system. We're not robots. We are affected by bad news just like any other person hearing this information, such as a provider, but we strive to always remain impartial. We don't interject personal opinions, counsel, or advise patients.